one picture can tell the entire story. The picture of people in the streets demanding the right to ride on buses.
People were scrambling. They just had never seen anything like this in their lives.
Everybody was fighting for freedom.
We have a right to be part of society. We have a right to be in the world. We will ride. They weren't going to move.
This was in the late 70s that the Gang of 19 happened, and that movement is what led to the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Not just for Denver, Colorado, but for people all over the country, trying to gain equity.
Not too many people get a chance to be on the front seat of history.
Denver has a pretty significant role in everything that led up to the passage of the ADA.
People have kind of come to understand that the ADA came out of the Gang of 19 and the protest movement that began here in Denver.
Quality of life. The ADA has given me a quality of life.
The enormous move forward from ADA have truly enriched our lives. And when years ago we would have been in the house afraid of going out,
Close toolbar banner. https://www.apple.com.
I had lost my eyesight on my left eye. It was misdiagnosed, and so in 2011 the same symptoms happened. Within 2 weeks I was blind, and then I suddenly lost my eyesight. I lost my job. Well, it's like anything when you lose something significant. It was difficult, coping with the idea of never being able to see faces anymore, and having to give up my car. I'm an avid cyclist and had to give up my bicycle, and I was an avid photographer and videographer and had to give all of that up. I have some remaining eyesight, it's very little, and so my optic nerve has died, but I've got filaments left that give me shapes and light.
Alert from
so
calendar.
I can hear what the
Located.
email is,
Colorado
and
Digital
then
Sample Session Driving
I
Meeting.
magnify. I can listen to everything. I listen to my emails, I listen to my books, I listen to the newspaper.
Try again. Containers. Language.
Language.
Español.
So now it'll read to me in Spanish. And so when then I became disabled, I benefited from nearly 23 years of ADA regulations. So I can take a piece of paper, I can go like this and push this button, and then it's scanning it.
June 11th, 15, Colorado Department of Revenue, Denver, Colorado, 80261-0013 www. Colorado GovX. Renewal application for sales tax license.
I've started to realize the enormous advantage of having a building that has been adapted to the regulations and that made it possible for people with disabilities to not only get out of the house, but be productive, be out in the workforce.
So the world really looked a lot different before the passage of the ADA. An employer would have every right to say, we don't hire people in wheelchairs, or we don't hire people who are blind. Businesses were not required to be accessible.
So we had a lot of job discrimination. We couldn't use public places. Travel was an absolute nightmare. It was to kind of just expect that we weren't going to get to do what everyone else gets to do.
So the ADA was sort of the first law that made it, nationwide, non-discrimination and providing equal access to people with disabilities.
We see disability as a culture, as part of who we are, and as something that is nothing to be like sad about or ashamed about. It's not a tragedy. It's part of the normal human experience.
I think people get the perception of folks in wheelchairs that we're not sexual, we're not human beings, we don't love, we're asexual, we don't have jobs, we don't, whatever your stereotype of a person with a disability, erase it. I use the hashtag wheelchair boss life because that's what I feel like I'm doing. And I actually met my wife online on Facebook. When you're in any relationship and you're walking with your significant other, it's just a feeling of like, you know, I know she's got my back and I love her with all my heart. It looks as special as it is. I'll tell you what my mother used to say about me. The only thing that is wrong with Stuart is he can't walk. I jumped in a lake when I was 14 years old, and it was probably about, I would say about 3 feet of 2 feet of water I jumped into. Fractured C4 and C5 of my vertebrae. You know, I've been in a wheelchair for about 38 years now, and I'm doing so well from the ADA, I didn't know I needed it. I didn't realize how much I benefited from it. I had to get on a bus when I was in the Springs years ago. Just that one bus showed up. And I was sitting there and I'm like, when is the next bus coming? The guy comes up. He says, well, the next bus will be along with a lift in about 45 minutes to an hour. Once I got here to Denver, there's a lift on every single bus.
So this was the site right here. We're on the corner, the south side of Colfax and the east side of Broadway. So this was quite a site for the, as some people said, the shot heard around the world, where 19 people immobilized 2 buses for 2 days.
Gang of 19 were the 19 people with disabilities that, you know, came out of institutions. Some of them couldn't read or write. Some of them had never really had anything in their lives, but they laid down their bodies on the line for something that was bigger than themselves.
What I love about our movement in Colorado is once they took Colfax and Broadway, we've never stopped.
Yeah. This bus stop is dedicated by the Regional Transportation District, or RTD, to the memory of Reverend Wade Blank. Reverend Blank and 19 other members of a disability advocacy group blocked a RTD East Colfax local bus on July 5th and 6th, 1978.
I think of Wade Blank as the Martin Luther King of the national disability rights movement, which is ironic because he was able-bodied. Wade was a gigantic figure. He was a complete Cleveland Browns nut. He was a long-haired, down to mid-back, blonde-haired Presbyterian street minister. He surfaced in Denver and became the activities director at Heritage House. Heritage House had a youth wing.
He's like, well, young people like to do young people stuff, like go to bars and ball games and, you know, stuff that young concerts. So he started arranging those outings, and they loved it, and he got fired. So he started thinking, and they started talking, and he hooked up with a guy named Barry Rosenberg.
When I started working with persons with disabilities at the nursing home with Wade Blank in 1973, we tried to humanize. You know, we had dogs, we served pizza, we had wine.
He empowered people, so he was beloved by the movement.
Wade came up to me and said, I have this idea of, we called it Atlantis.
And it's like, why can't we provide these services in people's homes? Why can't we just get them out? So that's what they did. And that was the starting of the Atlantis community. And then the independent living movement started. There was kind of a branch that started in California, and then a branch that started here in Denver. Before then, you know, there was really no other choice other than institutional care. When kids with disabilities were born, doctors would say to parents, the kind thing to do is to put them in an institution.
I was born in 1965. I was a kid growing up in a nursing home. I was carried into my school because there were steps there, right? I would be 6 months in a kid's institution and 6 months outside the institution, and then on and off again until I was a teenager. And then I just was able to say, not going back. And I think that's what the ADA has proved, is that you just need equal access. It has made such a big difference in my life. Sometimes it's hard to remember what it was like before then. And to remember that, you go to dark and painful places.
If you go back to the 70s, you realize that there was a national senatorial investigation, and it was called Nursing Homes, a Failure in Public Policy. Then the first volume was called The Litany of Abuse.
And there was poor treatment in state-run institutions and also mental institutions.
It was really bad. There was one kid who had bed sores that were so grave that they'd eaten up his body to the point that he was amputated above his waist. There were people with cockroaches in their cereal. There was a woman who was in a full body cast. Flies were all over her face. There were a litany of other wrongs done, from more bed sores to inadequate nutrition. That was before the RTD lawsuit began.
They needed to get on the bus because many people with disabilities can't drive. So first there were no lifts, then they put a few lifts on, but you never knew which bus was going to have a lift and which wasn't. And so RTD would say, well, we don't see a lot of people with disabilities on the bus. Well, that's because it was a totally unworkable system.
And so we started a federal lawsuit against RTD to require that there be lifts put on all the new buses. And that led to the demonstration that occurred in July of 1978, now referred to as the Gang of 19 protest.
And so they just kept on fighting that issue, and you know, it didn't work, so they finally shut down traffic to get attention.
And they went down to Colfax and Broadway, and when the first bus came, they surrounded it with wheelchairs, basically capturing it and snarling traffic.
I saw when it all unfolded and when everyone, wheeled out and blocked the buses, and there were lots of people. No one knew what to do. The drivers, couldn't go anywhere. They got out of the buses, and very shortly the police came.
The police actually did not know how to behave, what to do.
I think they didn't know how to handle someone in a wheelchair. What do you do? They didn't want bad PR. The press was here.
So they arrested their attendants instead. Basically a personal attendant, people who assisted people in doing things. That's how far backwards this situation was when it began. They could not even get arrested for protesting, leading us to sue them about that, because how can you have a civil rights movement if you can't even get arrested? And I had not one but two state court judges rule in great detail that the disabled had an equal right to be arrested. It took 2 years of constant protesting in Denver for RTD to cave, and they decided that rather than resisting the movement, they would embrace the movement, giving up on the appeal and agreeing to retrofit all 254 buses. And they inspired the world too. I mean, Denver became the most accessible city in the world at the time. The movement rather rapidly expanded nationally, but also led to the development of ADAPT and a national movement that culminated with the ADA and the March on Washington, which Wade led. with 500 souls climbing up the Capitol steps in 1990.
Where they literally, crawled up the stairs to the state capitol in order to sort of demonstrate why access is so important and really shed a light on the fact that they were being left behind.
They were an inspired group. They were articulate, they were mad, they were relentless, and they protested. Many of them got arrested 50 times or more.
And ADAPT is the group that's going to make this happen.
ADAPT was born, out of the Gang of 19 in 1978.
It started American Disabled for Accessible Public Transportation. Then it became American Disabled for Attendant Programs Today.
Started in Denver. Denver has probably the most powerful ADAPT organization, chapter in the country.
I want to thank everybody that spent 14 days down here on this sidewalk and the dedication of this disability community.
ADAPT was a game changer, and they're still at it.
Like many people said, RTD and the local transit is not perfect, but I'll tell you, it's a lot better than some places in this country. But again, our work is not done.
And the ADA went far beyond the RTD. The buses will be equipped, the buses will be accessible, to all services will be available, to all accommodations that are reasonable will be made.
So it's not about providing welfare services or, a leg up to people with disabilities. It's just about leveling the playing field and making it so that because a person has a disability, they're not starting their life at a disadvantage.
It was incredible. It was, we used to have a bumper sticker that said to boldly go where everyone else has gone before. We're saying, wow, I can have dreams. I can think about having a career. I can think about going places I've never been allowed to go. Or I don't worry when I'm in a new city if the bus is going to have a lift. I assume they all have lifts. I can go to hotels and get a wheelchair room. HR at every company has reasonable accommodation forms for employees with disabilities. It's not unheard of if someone needs to go to the doctor to say, I need a sign language interpreter.
I think over the last 30 years since the ADA was passed, we've really seen a lot of improvement and progress with the built environment. So, it's starting to be a lot more common to see, proper curb cuts, proper ramps, that physical access is really kind of, I would say, some of the biggest success.
The ADA is the equivalent of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And that movement continues today. In Denver is, and nationally. And the work is never done. The movement is never complete. The disability rights movement struggles to be remembered every day.
We thought the ADA would just kind of make everything equal, and that, of course, that was before we really looked at things from an equity framework, and really didn't understand kind of the deep-seated societal oppression. So there's a lot as our country tries to come to terms with our racism and our racist past and present. People with disabilities who are, Black, Indigenous, other people of color, deal with multiple levels of discrimination.
Normally when I go someplace, it's usually I'm the only person in a wheelchair, and I'm the only Black guy there. So I'm having to have that conversation with some of my white friends, and then also have the conversation in general about what it's like to be disabled. In general, I think that Denver has a little bit to go. I think for everybody, it's getting better. The city officials are listening.
The exclusions are more subtle, and the failures of the system to adapt are less egregious because bigger issues have been won. Public access has been won.
Now in Colorado, we've been a leader. We have done more home and community-based programs than a lot of other states. We're not done yet. We still have people in facilities that shouldn't be. Housing is without doubt the biggest issue. And then I also think the next frontier really needs to be doing a better job on effective communication for people with all types of disabilities.
When the ADA was passed in 1990, you know, the internet didn't really exist, at least not in the way that it does today. And unfortunately, the ADA didn't have any regulations to address digital accessibility because it just kind of wasn't in existence yet. I think another important aspect is thinking about social media accessibility and how to make social media content accessible.
I don't do Facebook. I will post on Facebook, but Facebook is so visual. So you can just go and say, okay, cute, okay, well, I have to listen to every one of them, line by line. And this is from this person, and they're seeing this, and then there's a picture, you can't see the picture. So to me, it's very frustrating. You know, we got a granddaughter that's 2.5 and super cute, and so our son keeps posting, and then it's, oh, look at this video, look at this thing, okay, whatever, and I miss out on it.
A lot of times, you know, as the folks with disabilities, we have to adapt to your world.
I have to cross the street by listening. I have to listen for traffic patterns. If I push the button, I would be listening for that car to be slowing down. Intersections are scary, and that's why there's a lot of blind people that don't venture beyond their known routes. And it takes courage sometimes to just stick that cane out on the street. I understand the pattern, I'm going to cross right now, okay?
Food for thought, just think of every day, your world is mine, and you have to figure out way in advance how you're going to get to work. Sidewalks to a person that's disabled and uses a wheelchair, that is literally my lifeline of how I navigate the world. If I can't get there, just think about your car not having a wheel. So it impedes my progress.
But also for people with visual impairments, going down a sidewalk that has a lot of broken up parts, branches that stick out, because our cane is feeling for stuff down on the ground. But if a branch is at this height, it's unbelievable how many times my hat is taken off by a branch, or I get hit in the head by a branch or something.
As I say, it's the one minority you can join at any time. Right now, God forbid, a car could bounce this curb and both of us would be on the same plane.
So I can't wake up tomorrow and be a person of a different skin color, but I could wake up tomorrow and have a disability. You know, any of us could.
And we also see that what things that have happened because of the Americans with Disabilities Act help everyone. It's not just us. There's a name for it, actually. It's called the curb cut effect. They're good for folks in wheelchairs, but they're also good for people on scooters and strollers and with grocery carts, and for a whole bunch of reasons. And one thing that's interesting is some of the technology that we rely on now, like voice to speech, even video, like video phones where you can talk and see someone, like, you know, which is what Zoom is based on, was developed for deaf people, and the talk to text was developed for blind people. And now it's just part of our world. And at one point, the idea of working from home was a disability thing. It's a good thing now that I guess that we figured out that that's doable.
So improvements to buildings, improvements in transportation, improvements in technology. It's hard. I mean, it took a long time to get to be comfortable with all of this, right? We are enabled to do whatever we want to do, get out and exist.
To the folks who climbed up steps, climbed out of their wheelchairs, who strapped themselves to buses, I owe you a lot. I owe you a lot. I really appreciate it.